Okay. Pause that. Okay. Been threatening you with labs, and so we're at that point now. Couple of things you need to understand. I have taught in this lab for, what is this, 2014, longer than I care to admit, 13 years. The TSM curriculum committee made the decision about 4 years ago that all of our 300 and 400 level classes had to be completely online, accessible, identical to the local classes. Biggest difference that had existed before that is, it's pretty tough to do online labs. So we invested a lot in putting an online lab environment together. And you guys are not the first ones, but you're the first ones to actually do something called hardware in the loop, which means you'll be logging into what you could mistake for a virtual environment. It's not. You're actually working on real, physical, yep, it's there equipment. And the lab today is to simply get you familiar with that environment, to get your credentials set up, make sure you can log in and all of that, and to kind of show you how things work. The way I'll do labs through the semester, typically on Friday, I will bring up a lab in the environment. I'll just log into one of the same pods you guys are using, and I will show you a fully working system for whatever we happen to be talking about. If we're doing dial planning, I'll bring up a system with 5 or 6 users, a working dial plan, and kind of show you the different things that are involved in that. What I will do at that point is assign you one or more small labs that are pieces of making that work. And basically, you're going to take whatever piece of equipment we're talking about. The first one will be our IP PBXs for a while. And you're going to take that from factory default to the system I show you. It may be in simple situations. It may be 1 or 2 labs. As we get further in the semester, it'll become more involved. I want to break the individual pieces into smaller labs instead of giving you this big long cookbook piece. I really want to underline the steps that you do, and I'm doing that by breaking it into smaller pieces. The reason is this highly structured environment that I've shown you for the PSTN is what's going away. So what you end up with is at the local level, you have an awful lot of switching intelligence, switching from the voice point of view. You have a lot of capability to steer things where you want to be. There are a lot of decisions to be made. Rather than try to build a lab for every possible combination, I want to show you labs that are the steps you get there, and then I'm going to give you practice by giving you different combinations of those. This stuff is not hard. It is intricate. Okay? And so I want to give you practice in that. So, for example, when we move from our first few labs, will just be in one site. Here's a little isolated network, doesn't talk to anybody in the world. We just use it to talk among ourselves. As we expand that, we'll add going out to, another site's voice over IP system. We'll talk to the PSTN. And I'm going to do those pieces as individual detail assignments. More on that when we get there. But, basically what we're talking about is on Fridays, I'll show you a complete working system. You will have homework mostly over the next week, before the next Friday, that'll be due doing those. Now, part of what this system does is it allows you to schedule use of the system. You don't have to be in this room to use it. You can use this from home. That's the great part. The bad part, I know you can use it from home, so I don't have to scale things to what fits in an hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours. Okay, it's a trade. I promise not to beat up on you too badly. I do expect you to do the work by the deadline I tell you. Okay, so what I'm going to show you in your lab environment, we're going to walk through. You can see the learning goals. Basically today I want you to understand the structure we're looking at. You're going to be able to log in, see how to use the stuff in here. You'll be able to log into the NetLab environment. That's what the environment we're using is actually called. You'll be able to schedule time on it, and you'll be able to log into the hardware systems at each lab station. Lab station, they're going to be a little bit of a leap for you to understand what a lab station is. It's not just the physical chair you're sitting in. Each lab station emulates a 4-site network, 4-site enterprise network. We're going to use one of the sites today. But if you look at, I've got a larger version of this on each of the lab stations, but the diagram there at the bottom of page 1 actually is your network. So everything you see in green, in a green background, is one of your sites. Today we're going to use the very top one, and that's it. We're not even going to use all of it. Okay? As we go along, we'll add things to it. Where you see Metro E and PSTN and Voice over IP, that's me emulating those things. PSTN, of course, is what we've talked about, public switch telephone network. That circuit switch world we've been dealing with. It's also where our wide area net connections that aren't Ethernet based are going to come from. Metro E, Metro Ethernet is Ethernet frames transmitted over a physical network that's been messed with so it'll go further than 100 meters. What the carrier hands to you is an Ethernet interface just like you've always used. It's the way the world's going. It's what you're mostly going to see probably by the time you get out, certainly within 5 years. It's an Ethernet interface, and you hand it to the carrier, then a miracle occurs, and then it pops out at the other end of your network as Ethernet. Okay. That's kind of the way we look at it. It has some really interesting stuff in it. We don't actually have Metro E. Its big difference for us is that it is VLAN based. So even though you may be sharing it with 100 other users, you're only going to see your devices. And that's what I emulate in here. You know, I've built VLANs to isolate the lab stations, basically what it amounts to. The voice over IP portion, there are times when I'm going to want you to configure your system and know that you can go to a system that's correctly configured. That's when I'm going to point you at that device. Okay. We'll also use that when we talk about hosted voice over IP. We'll use it a little bit. It is the same switch you're using in my rack is what that amounts to. Okay. As I said, we'll start off simple. As we add things through the semester, we'll kind of make the world a little more complex as we go along. Okay. If you go on to the next page, I'm going to leave most of this as a reading assignment for you that I'll put up. But the highlights are, if you look at that next diagram, the way this system works, if you'll notice on the bottom right side of that diagram, you have a small version of what I just outlined for you. You know, the 4-site network, yada, 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 yada. There are 4 of those lab stations, and they are identically equipped. There are 4 4-site networks that you're going to be using. Okay. The way this NetLab system works, ignoring the computer and the internet cloud for just a moment, you're going to, if you're sitting in this lab, you're going to use a thin client, you know, a computer without a hard drive in essence, to access a virtual machine that's on one of our department servers, and that virtual machine sits on the university Active Directory domain. You'll log in using your Active Directory credentials effectively into a computer. Once you're in there, then you're going to access NetLab. Okay? NetLab is a server, and it builds an environment. So what you're going to see is you'll go from your VM, you'll hit NetLab, authenticate against it. I've created accounts for you. Once you're in NetLab, you're not actually taking your computer that you're working on into the lab environment. NetLab is shipping you keyboard, mouse, and monitor to your machine. The networks inside the lab stations do not talk to the outside world. They're in a bubble. Okay? If you need to use a machine on one of the local nets in there, we have virtual machines built inside those labs that you can start up and use. It's a really cool environment. You can pull up the command line interface for most of the hardware that we use. You can actually pull a console interface. It is not a telnet. It is actually a console connection. You can restart the router and watch it restart across the network. Very cool. There are a few of our pieces of equipment that don't support console. Some of them it's a cost thing, some of them it's a technical piece. In those cases, we'll use telnet to program them. Where do you run telnet? From one of the VMs, because you've got to run it from the network that's on the same network as the machine you're trying to control. Remember, NetLab is not a router. You can't get inside the NetLab environment using IP. There's not a path. Okay? That's probably the hardest thing to understand. It took me a little while to get my head around that, working with it. So, what we'll do today is walk through that. You'll go in, log in, get your credentials set up. You are going to have to make up a password. I have a default password for you. The passwords have to be between 7 and 16 ASCII characters. They cannot be an English dictionary word. And you must have both numbers, at least one number and one character in it. I don't know about special characters. One of my passwords uses a special character, so I know it does at least some of them. Anyway, you'll do that here in a second. There are 4 lab station setups. Only one user can use them at once. You actually can do teams. If we get to that point, I'll show you how to do that. Right now, my plan is not to do teamwork on that. Which means you are going to have to schedule time on the system and do your work. The upside, you don't have, there may be weeks when we say, here's the lab, I'll do it on Wednesday. I know, for example, there's one weekend in April that I'm not going to be here on Friday. I'll introduce the lab on Wednesday, and you guys do it between then and probably the next Monday. We won't meet on Friday. The trade-off is I'm not going to have a lot of patients saying I didn't have time to do the lab. Well, you have as much time as everybody else. So, okay. We'll learn how to use the scheduler today. It's easy. It's like anybody's view of the world. It's the way this guy or guys or whatever team decided to put it together. It's not the way I'd have done it, but it's what we have to work with. Most of that we can deal with in the lab. If you flip over to the next to the last page, you'll see another diagram with a green background. That's actually what we're going to work on today. And if you pull out your magnifying glass, you can actually match that up with the top section of the first page. It's the main site of that 4-site network. And this is actually where we're going to be for a few weeks. What you're going to do today, once you get logged in, is to access that piece of equipment. It's called a NetNata 7100. It's made by Adtran. It is a voice over IP PBX, a fully capable router, 24-port switch, and a few other little things all wrapped in a box. It is a serious piece of hardware. You will have full administrative rights to it. When we get to the point pretty quickly where I'm going to want you to write custom configs, you'll actually save those out to a TFTP server, and that'll be a part of your grade, actually, is what that config looks like that you send out. Today, we're not going to worry about configs. We're just going to play with the access. Like the Cisco gear that you're used to working with, 7100 supports both a command line interface and a GUI interface. I suppose it's possible to do everything from the command line. There are a few things that I have yet to figure out how to do from the command line. There are more things that I can do, but it's a lot easier to do from the GUI. There are some things that are way easier to do from the command line. We're going to learn both of them. Okay. One note, Adtran Corporation, they are an equipment manufacturer in Huntsville, Alabama. They have been in business since 1988. They have never had a losing quarter. They have never had a quarter that showed loss. Good company. They love this program. They hired one of our people, hired his brother, what, gosh, 10 years ago? 2000, okay, so 10 years ago. And he did a great job because they came up and said, we want more. And at one point, we had 80% of their technical support staff, which sounds, yeah, technical support. It's the entry-level technical job for everything except actual board-level product design. You go through technical support, then you go out in product development and all the others. So it's a good job to get. We still have, I think, 9 people there. Now, one of the posters in the hall is AdTran. They support this program very well. They've, to date, donated about $200,000 worth of stuff, an awful lot of which is sitting in this room. So you've got a good friend in AdTran. Having said that, I do not teach AdTran's way of doing things, just like we don't teach Cisco's way of doing things in other labs. Well, what I'm teaching you is how to do voice over IP. Oh, by the way, we're doing it on AdTran's gear. And I made that very plain to them. They're just fine with it. Okay. So understand that. I'm not pushing AdTran. I am going to show you the AdTran environment. You know, I've said different manufacturers do things differently. We're going to learn the AdTran way. It's very similar. If you go to a Cisco piece of gear, you're going to do the similar types of things. Okay. Anyway, this module you're going to look at today, there are 2 virtual machines. There is the Netvanta 7100, and there is an IP706 hard phone. Hard phone just means it's a telephone that's made for IP. It looks like a telephone. It is a computer. You know, it boots, it does DHCP, it does all that stuff. We're not going to use the phone today, but we'll take it. Actually, we do use the phone a little bit today. We'll get into those a little bit later. The physical layout in the lab. You'll flip over to the last page, and this is just so you know your way around when I'm referring to things. We have 4 lab stations. They are the middle 4 desks in this area. Okay, I've got names on them. So you know where you need to sit. I'll come back to that. All of the remote equipment for lab stations 1 and 2 is actually on the outside table on this end. You can see all the cable hanging down. That's all the remote equipment for lab stations 1 and 2. So auxiliary site, branch site, telecommuter. On this lab station, it's the outside table on this end. The reason it doesn't have cables hanging down is I measured wrong, so I had to order them new, and they just came in. They'll be there by the time you need them. To be honest, we're not going to use the remote stuff for a few weeks. Okay. I have assigned you to a specific lab pod. The lab pods for what we do in here, you need to sit together in that lab pod. If it's not who you want to sit by, sorry, bear with me. I know there are groups of you that like to work together, and what I've tried to do actually is in here is to split you up. And it's not because I don't want you to work together. It's because when you leave here, my guess is you're probably going to want to work together when you come in remotely. If you're in the same pod, only one of you can log in. So I've put you, as much as I know, I've put you into groups that allow you to do that. I don't care if you come into the general lab in here or in here during the week and work on your labs together. I would ask you to do, when I give you something to do in here, I would ask you to do it in good faith, actually work through it, learn what I'm trying to do. I'm not giving you cookbook labs. You know, you're going to have to stop, you're going to have to scratch your head, you're going to have to figure through some things. I'm going to frustrate the fool out of you a few times because I guarantee you there'll be things that won't work, and I'm going to let you work through it. I won't leave you hanging, but I'm going to let you work through it. Okay. For that reason, I wanted you to be able to work simultaneously. If you find that the person you want to work with, a good bit if that applies, is in the same pod, come talk to me. We'll see if we can do it. I need to keep the load on the pods relatively balanced. So basically what I did was go through the roster and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to keep it balanced. So we have a little bit of ability to change. Think if you really need it before you ask me, please. Okay. The core equipment is in the 2 racks back here. The racks are actually numbered. 11, 12 are the ones back in the back. 13 and 14 are the two racks away from you here. 15 and 16 are the racks closer to you. For most of our stuff, that's not really going to matter. You will notice sometimes I'll have you look at stuff and you're going to see the name of the equipment includes the rack name. That's where it is. I'm hesitating because if you've had me for class before this, one of the things I've harped on a lot is you have to be able to separate in your mind the physical network from the logical network. You've got to be able to think about those two independently. We're doing a lot of smoke and mirrors in here to make this work. That's why what I'm giving you in the lab is a logical view of this world. I am more than happy to show you how the connections work. Just understand it looks way different than that logical diagram. For instance, none of those VMs are here. They live in the server back in our server room. Okay? But we have to cable them from every piece of equipment they're attached to. We have to maintain a single Ethernet path all the way back. It gets a little weird. I'm glad to show you. You might want to wait until you've used the environment a little bit before you try to trace that too much. I'm talking to myself a little bit. I'm one who has to go trace where all the wires go and then figure out how the protocols work and all that stuff on that. And it's really confusing in here. So I would suggest that you learn the logical diagram first. When you're comfortable with that, if you're interested, I'll be glad to show you how we've got it mocked up in here. I'm afraid it would be confusing if you try to trace it too closely. Having said that, looking at the back of an individual piece of equipment will be pretty straightforward with the exception of the virtual machine. So I will have you do that. Okay. There's stuff in big bold letters on the back. There is both a local and an online section of this class. We're all sharing the same lab. We're all using the same scheduler. As far as MATLAB is concerned, there's one class. I didn't break this into two pieces. When you go to the lab stations, you'll notice that lab station 3 is going to have a list of names right beside it. Lab station 4 is a list of names. There are people in the online class in your group. So basically, try to keep it to where only 6 or 7 people are continuing the time on a given call. Please realize that all the cabling connections are the way they need to be. If you uncable something here, and you get one of my students who lives on the West Coast, it's going to be real tough for him to put that cable back. Nothing in these labs requires you to change cable. I generally try to be very easy to get along with, but I have literally stopped counting at 75 hours at the amount of time I have to do cable myself. And I have zero sense of how to change workloads. Got to document it. I can get it back. But I don't like it. Be aware that other people are using it and may be using the equipment while you're standing in the room on that schedule. Okay. Cleanup. We'll talk about saving files later. That's part of the cleanup in most of my lab procedures. In here, log out of the equipment. If you have paper that you've used on the desk, throw it away. Just leave the lab looking nice. One of the things about doing this, we took some equipment that this company, NetLab, manufactured, and we're making it do things they never thought about making it do. We're going to have visitors. I've already had ink. We need to keep things looking reasonably nice. I realize I'm looking at our stack of stuff. Can't see it go away. Just leave the lab station in good shape. I've been walking around with poor old folks in the online class talking to my ankle. Sorry about that online class. Anybody notice how long ago that happened? Uh-oh. Okay. I'll check the recording and see what happened.
Online students, that means in the online class or active enrolled?
It means students enrolled in the online class. So, okay. So questions on what this world is you're about to enter and how we're going to use it? Okay. Let's go on back. You can read the names, but let me call them out. Lab Station 1, which is the inside lab furthest away over here. John Alvis, Daniel Garfinkel, Cody Nelson, Austin Smock. Lab Station 2, which is this side nearest me. Mark Beam, Corey Slaughter, Brad Riley, Tyler White. Lab Station 3, which is nearest to me on the other side. Landon Kane, Matt Halford, and Jordan Smith. Lab Station 4, away from me on the other side. Chris Chun, Michael Mangold, and Haley Carmen. Go ahead and sit down. Please don't start on the lab procedure. I want to show you some stuff up here first. Okay, but when everybody gets settled, we'll take a look. You can drag other lab stools around if you like. Okay. Please do read the lab. I'll put it up as an assignment on Canvas. It is important that you read through this. There's a lot of information there that you need. For example, you need to use Firefox. If you don't, that's fine. It's up to you. It may not look like what I described. Okay. Wrong name. Yeah. 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 You don't have to downgrade to Firefox from 2 years ago. It's that or above. I'll tell you the story behind Herbert Greenfield a little sometime.
Oh, I thought it was your password. I had something to do with your password.
No, it was my alter ego. Herbert Greenfield can do everything I can do, just not as well. It came from my days in television. I'd have to do commercials that were awful. I didn't want to put my name on them, so I put Herbert Greenfield's name on them. Okay, what I just did was log in like the lab procedure talked to you about. First thing you're going to come up to is you're going to see a remote access test. You also have to have Java running on the machine. I forgot to mention it's in the lab. Remember that this environment only exists inside that bubble, but you have to talk to it from the outside world. So if I'm going to open one of the VMs in a lab, I've got to move keyboard, mouse, and monitor from that virtual machine across the network out through the port to your machine wherever you are. That's what this test is making sure works. Don't skip it. Okay? Yeah, actually you can try to skip it. It just won't work if you do. There's what you get if you don't. If you get it going. Okay, when you get to this point, and in this lab today, a key piece is I want everybody in here to go through to a certain point, stop, log out, and let everybody at the station get to that point before you go any further. That point is just before you start section 3, which is reserving NetLab or lab station time in NetLab. I want everybody at your table to have logged in using their credentials and to have gotten to the point just prior to section 3. One thing, and I'll list this in the lab, but it threw me, I screwed up and it threw me off a couple of times. The first time you log in from the thin client and hit the VM, it's going to build a profile. It's a sizable profile. There's a lot of other stuff running on that server. It can take 3 minutes for it to build a profile. Let it do it. If you quit out of it, go back, get back to that point, it's going to start over. Okay, let it finish. Okay, once you get through all of that and everybody's done it, what you're going to do is go on in and you're going to see something like this. Reserve time for yourself, reserve time for your team. We're not using Teams right now. I may change my mind as the semester goes along. But right now, we're not using Teams. So this will be reserved time for yourself. And what you're going to do is go on in. As we go through the semester, we're going to leave all of the lab configurations as we build them up there. So you'll see a lot. Today, there's just lab configuration 1. You'll probably use the same lab configuration for more than one lab. Until we need to change the hardware, we don't have to change the configuration. What you'll do to schedule is you'll select which lab configuration you want to use, click on it, and then it's just going to bring up a calendar. Okay, This account, I associated my test account with pod 4. So it's going to show me pod 4. Okay? And what I'm going to do is go in. Actually, I'm not going to actually get in here because you guys will get there. If I want to schedule this for 6 p.m. this evening, I click on 6 p.m. and I tell it how long I want to do. You may reserve up to 2 hours at a block. You can't reserve more than 2 hours in a single block. You also cannot make back-to-back reservations. We've told the system to make you wait at least 2 hours between reservations, just so somebody doesn't go, okay, I'm going to line up 4 blocks and have 8 hours of time. No. You can, of course, if you want to work in pairs, one of you do it and another one do it. That's up to you. I'm going to set an end time. I'll erase this so it doesn't really matter. But let's say I want to do 2 hours. So 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. This initial config, it actually doesn't do anything. You can leave it. If you remember to, just click no config. It'll start a little faster. It'll work either way. Say OK. Want to make another reservation? No, I'm done. What you'll see up here now is that is my reservation. Now, it's not until 6 this evening, so I can't actually go in. When you do this in here, one of the things you can do is go in and say, you can start the reservation right now. Just click right to where now is, and it'll start now, and you set it up for an hour out. When you can go into the lab, a button will appear right here that says enter the lab or enter lab. Okay, you click on that, and it'll take you into the lab. Okay. So before you leave today, we'll get you need to schedule some time. If you keep that, that's fine. You can also just go in and delete it if you like. I don't care, but I want everybody to actually schedule some time. So go ahead and work through it. Get everybody to the point ready to start number 3, and then wait for me, if you will. So Herbert Greenfield. Every one of us had an alias for exactly that same reason. And I just kept Herbert around because he's really useful. When I worked in television, he could do everything I could do, except he had really bad taste in video. So, okay, online class, I'm going to stop the recording at this point, because you need to do the lab procedure. I will have a discussion board open for help on this, but there's no sense recording this. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, and I will post, the labs are posted. By the time you see this, anyway, the labs will be posted.